Imagine you're alone. It's a big world, and it's a hard life, and nobody understands the depth of existence like you do. Everything else seems to move through this world blissfully unaware of most of the details, but you notice them. Yet despite your observance, you still find yourself utterly alone. You've been looking, listening for signs of another like you, but if they're out there, then their signals are drowned out by the sheer noise of everything else. So you go somewhere quiet, isolated, where you can stand high above the natural landscape and broadcast your intentions. Maybe there are still others out there just like you, searching for any sign of your existence in this brutally noisy world. So you stand tall in the quiet and call out. Sounds you've heard before, sounds you've made up, and electromagnetic flashes that will only make sense to another just like you. You broadcast on every frequency you know. You listen for a reply. You broadcast again. You listen again. But there is no reply. There's never a reply. Just these noisy vertebrates with Wi-Fi hotspots in their pockets showing up all the time with their distracting racket. And you hate them for it. Sirenhead, or the Sirenhead, is a cryptid created in the art of Trevor Henderson. It's an oddly beloved creation depicted with a roughly humanoid shape, but a tower with multiple sirens in place of where the head should be. Sirenhead is an ambush hunter, a master of both camouflage and audio mimicry, capable of electrical interference and emitting radio signals. According to Trevor's lore, it's an unfathomable supernatural entity. But I look at this creature, this fun little guy at some 40 foot tall, and I'm pretty sure it's actually a mollusk, and that it hates us, specifically. Now, I know claiming Sirenhead is a mollusk might be a little unusual, but the more I think about it, the more certain I get. And more than that, I think I can hypothesize part of its evolutionary history. If Sirenhead is indeed a creature that evolved here on Earth, then I suspect the world has changed so dramatically since the late Cretaceous, when it first started to haunt the North American continent, that it is both going extinct and going insane. The world has changed a lot since the Cretaceous, when the Western Interior Seaway was just starting to dry up. You know mollusks. Most of them are friendly little guys that are sometimes incredibly poisonous, that consist of a fleshy body that may or may not have a shell in some sort of weird and wonderful arrangement. But most relevant to this hypothesis are our friends, the squid and the octopus. These definitely earthling creatures are some of the most intelligent non-human minds on the planet, and almost certainly the most intelligent invertebrates. That intelligence allows members of this group to be cunning ambush hunters and masterful mimics. Some of them will engage with tool use, and octopus in particular can be clever enough to know sometimes they need to leave the water to gain an advantage. Sirenhead, as it happens, is also excellent at camouflage, to the extent that it's debated whether it's partially incorporeal, and an ambush predator who probably commands a lot more intelligence than we're comfortable with. These are traits that overlap with the cephalopods. Absolute octopus behaviour. But ferox, you may deride. Sirenhead is very clearly a humanoid shape, not a cephalopod shape. To which I say, do you really think the crabs being hunted by the mimic octopus understand the true shape of their predator? If you envision something with the approximate shape of a squid or an octopus, because my hypothesis is that Sirenhead evolved from the common ancestor of both, then we have a relatively chunky central body surrounded by 8 to 10 limbs of the tentacly variety. But that body can be largely reshaped because it has no central bone. Well, mimic octopus change their posture depending on what they want to resemble. And in this case, it's not implausible to hypothesize that the classic Sirenhead figure has combined 2 appendages into each limb, including the head, in order to stand on 2 and reach one pair up as high as possible, holding the sirens aloft. This means that the actual head of the creature is what we perceive as the body, and that any limb or pairs of limbs are interchangeable. We just perceive a humanoid shape because that's what we, as humanoids, are used to seeing. But then what are the sirens? I said it was holding them, not that they're actually attached. I think they could be shells, secretions the cryptid has produced from calcium carbonate, which it then carries to make it easier to hear the world around it. Octopus in particular have a distributed nervous system, which means there are way more neurons down their tentacles than you might otherwise expect. This allows their tentacles to respond automatically to movement and light and change their camouflage without conscious thought. But imagine those limbs are detecting sounds as well as light. And poor Sirenhead is stretching a pair up as high as it can, searching for the rare signals that would indicate another member of its species, using the cone-shaped shells to enhance the sound wave vibrations it can detect, rather like using an ear trumpet. In a pinch, Sirenhead could carry up to 6 of these cone shells, but that would make their posture less stable and is likely a sign of increasing age, desperation, and loneliness. Imagine our desperately lonely cryptid achieving a more advanced age and secreting more shells over time, hoping that more cones will funnel in more signals so that it can finally locate the second last member of the species. But still, there are no replies to its broadcasts. A master of audiovisual mimicry must be intelligent. Would it start to wonder over time whether there is anyone else out there? Would the suspicion that it is in fact an endling, the last member of its species, be maddening? But Ferox, you say, those sirens are reported to have teeth at certain frequencies. To which I say, certain frequencies of what exactly? Because radio waves are electromagnetic radiation, not sound waves. You think of radio waves as sound waves, but they're not. They're low-frequency electromagnetic radiation, which we encode audio signals into for communication purposes. The electromagnetic radiation you're most familiar with is visible light. But radio waves are actually the same type of energy, and on that spectrum of energy between the visible light we can see and the radio waves that Sirenhead can apparently detect, there are infrared and microwaves. So if Sirenhead can detect, decode and broadcast radio waves, that's actually electromagnetic radiation, not audio mimicry. It can still have audio mimicry as well, plenty of species do that, but the processing power required to understand and disrupt radio waves is an entirely different nightmare. One that implies quite a lot of intelligence. If Sirenhead is capable of that level of understanding, Sirenhead is not a mindless beast. It's at least human-level intelligence, and quite probably a lot more than that. Also, if Sirenhead can detect both electromagnetic radiation in the visual spectrum and radio waves, then in between the two we find infrared and microwaves. If Sirenhead can detect either end, it can probably detect the frequencies in the middle. Whether it can broadcast or disrupt infrared or microwaves remains to be seen, but it can almost certainly perceive them. Your Wi-Fi is a type of radio wave, by the way, so it's only a matter of time and practice before Sirenhead is capable of disrupting your Wi-Fi signals. So what frequencies are causing the sirens to appear filled with teeth? Because sound frequencies don't cause visual effects. There are sounds we can hear, the sounds below our hearing, infrasound, and the sound above our hearing, ultrasound. Infrasound can certainly make us feel some kind of way, haunted mostly, but it doesn't make us see things. Electromagnetic frequencies, though, that includes visual light, so some of those frequencies we will see. So imagine now that the teeth of Sirenhead are transient hallucinations or visual assumptions that panicked humans make when confronted with a cryptid they can't understand, emitting both audio and visual signals that disorientates our brains a little. It is hard to be objective when you're fleeing from a massive super-intelligent predator who hates you personally. Now, I'd hypothesize that Sirenhead can also detect and broadcast infrasound as well. We humans don't typically hear infrasound. We feel it, and we usually find it incredibly unnerving. In fact, there's a bunch of stuff that we broadcast but we don't actually hear, from the Wi-Fi signals in your pocket, the microwaves, to some of the sounds from subwoofers or mining explosions or industry or cars. We're actually a really incredibly noisy species. We're just generally not bothered by our own technology. But I think the Sirenhead is aware. I think it can see and hear all of it. Imagine how the poor cryptid must feel, able to hear, see, and sense all of those signals. That's almost half the electromagnetic and audio spectrums, with no way to really switch it off. No wonder the poor thing tries to emit white noise when it's sleeping. It's the only chance it has to get any respite from all this overstimulation, which is otherwise doubtlessly the precursor to a constant migraine. And these noisy, unceasing humans with their bright, unrelenting cities that never shut up, sprawling across the continent like a cancer. They've covered the land with their noise and light pollution within a generation, faster than a species like Sirenhead can evolve to adapt. We just never shut up. We're everywhere. And despite the occasional violent foray into a town, Sirenhead can't kill us all. It just doesn't have the time. So Sirenhead tries to go somewhere quiet, the isolated forests or the lonely plains. There's nowhere on the continent truly free from humans, but some places are definitely less populated than others, and it's in these places where it is not being completely driven insane by the noise of our civilizations. In the forgotten wilderness, Sirenhead can at least relax a little, hunt and live without constant overstimulation. But like all living species, eventually it will be compelled to seek out another member of its own kind to breed. So in this lowly landscape, Sirenhead reaches up high as it can into the sky, first listening and looking for signs of its kin, then broadcasting in every way it knows, showing off the wide range of its audiovisual mastery as a mating display, hoping desperately to find a reply, night after night. Only it never receives one, and this leads to a new kind of frustration and rage, particularly at those noisy vertebrate humans that keep disrupting and polluting the world with all those signals of their own. Human culture and technology changes rapidly, even from one decade to the next. Our scientific advancements are significantly more rapid and dramatic than any adaptation evolution could produce. Consequently, many other species on the planet, especially apex predators, find themselves left behind and facing extinction. I do not believe the Sirenhead is adapted to our modern world, despite what we think it looks like. I actually think it belongs to a world much, much older than ours. And we do know, as Trevor provided a sample, that Sirenhead showed up in art which is approximately 40,000 years old. That does not mean Sirenhead is 40,000 years old. That's just when humans started to develop art that could last. I actually think Sirenhead has been roaming the North American continent since the Cretaceous. Do you know what was happening on North America in the Cretaceous? It was flooded with a vast inland sea that was both relatively shallow and relatively warm. It was popularly known as Hell's Aquarium, and that's because being warm and light and full of life, it was also full of predators, like the mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs, and a bunch of enormous crocodilian species. There were also cephalopod species in these waters. There are bountiful fossils of just about everything else in the region, but cephalopods don't fossilize very well, especially the squid types. They are notoriously hard to find soft tissue fossils of because they have bugger all in the way of bones to start with some body types having just one interior bone and some having none at all. But they also have a tendency to float when dead instead of settling into the sediment at the ocean floor to get buried. And some, like the squids, become very alkaline, which lowers the odds of them becoming a fossil even further. So it's quite possible that there were large cephalopods in Hell's Aquarium that we don't know about, just because they preserve so poorly. But we do know there was at least one. Tusoteuthis is a cephalopod somewhere between octopus and squid that lived in the western interior seaway, which is known by just one interior bone. That's all we've got. We know from this bone that it would have been somewhere between 8 to 11 metres long, which puts it into the same size category as Sirenhead, which is often estimated around 12 metres high, and other cephalopod species have reached similar magnitudes, between the giant squid at 10 metres and the colossal squid at 14 metres. So it's plausible that Sirenhead's aquatic ancestors lived in these predator-rich waters, but that means they were competing with the likes of mosasaurs. They're probably not the fastest or strongest creatures out there, which means the niche they need to occupy is to become the smartest. So they develop enhanced intelligence, coupled with their ambush predator hunting style and excellent visual mimicry. This is particularly vital for juveniles, which need to spend their early lives hiding from the copious, incredibly dangerous creatures that live in the seaway. But then the western interior seaway dries up as North America becomes the continent we know today. Those warm, rich waters start shrinking, and Sirenhead's ancestors need to decide whether they return to the deeper waters of the Pacific or whether they crawl out onto land. And for this speculative species, they made the choice onto land. They're not alone on that land. For one thing, the crocodilians like Deinosuchus were quite happy living in the shallows, and these massive 12-metre-long beasts would probably have chewed on a Sirenhead. But there are also large theropods like our friend the Tyrannosaurus living on the land out there. Still plenty of very large predators to be putting pressure on Sirenhead. And we know the alligators still residing in North America use infrasound as part of their communications. Many large animals do. It's not unreasonable to suppose that the large predators of the Cretaceous North America did as well. So if these proto-Sirenheads could detect those sounds, it gave them another means to avoid being eaten. So perhaps being able to detect and communicate across such a wide range of audiovisual frequencies allowed them to avoid predation from the creatures they initially shared the continent with. And this probably worked for millions of years, until the climate shifted further, as the Ice Age would not have done a cephalopod any favours. They don't have fur or even a whole lot of body fat to regulate their body temperature, so they would have found snow a very unpleasant challenge to survive. And coupled with that, there are now humans on the continent, humans with a much more complex language system and an intricate level of teamwork. Most unique about humans is their tendency to live in groups and tell stories. The other megafauna can't pass on much detail to one another, but humans tell detailed stories about the monster they escaped from in the woods and how to avoid it. The buffalo aren't nearly this much trouble, and now there's not so much buffalo anymore, and the humans changed in a mere blink of evolutionary time. Now there are cities all over the landscape, even structures reaching up to the sky which at a distance could resemble others of Sirenhead species. And we flood the continent with so much noise and light all the time. No wonder the poor thing can't cope. No wonder it's going mad. Humans do this thing called intergenerational knowledge transfer. We raise our young. We teach them stuff, even from grandparents to grandchild. Wolves and orcas do a similar thing, but cephalopods just don't. In fact, many cephalopods die after reproducing, so the only thing their offspring gains from the parents is a meal. So statistically, if Sirenhead is a cephalopod, it quite likely dies after reproducing. For many cephalopods, one parent will die after the eggs are fertilized, and the other may guard the brood until they hatch. Honestly, there's a good chance that one parent gets eaten by the other because what sort of predator passes up free protein? Sirenhead is said to be territorial, and that's a problem if you have dozens upon dozens of newly hatched Sirenheads all hatching in the same location. So imagine now that the newly hatched Sirenheads cling to their dying mother's body as she embarks on one final journey across her territory. These juveniles with blocky bodies and long tentacles could be mistaken for the cassette tape with film spooling all over the place appearance that has been reported. And as she travels, the babies clinging to her like little opossums, they drop off one by one as she goes along the length of her territory, thus spreading them out. The last baby to cling to her when she finally dies gains the advantage of a massive meal, because cannibalism is just a protein boost for these neonates. It also means we're very unlikely to find a siren head who has died of natural causes, because the species will eat itself. So the baby siren heads enter the world with minimal experience, but a whole bunch of instincts. Unfortunately, those instincts evolved in a world filled with massive predators, not with all the lights and noise that the modern world generates. They're fundamentally ill-equipped to handle it. These baby siren heads would be obviously much smaller than their parents, and probably don't have the classic shell that comes to be recognized as the siren, but they are instinctive experts at camouflage, which brings us to an entirely different North American cryptid. Not much is known about the North American hide-behind, other than it's behind you, you can't see it, and it intends to eat you. It is sometimes described as being very tall and thin, and this description, plus its hunting style, plausibly matches a juvenile sirenhead. If sirenhead is a cephalopod, it doesn't need to be in a standing position all of the time. It could crouch down low, press itself up against a wall, cling to the underside of a roof. Just because we only recognize it standing doesn't mean it's not out there in other postures. Think back to the mimic octopus and its versatility. You could have no idea when it is there. And the bioluminescence it's capable of isn't much of a stretch. A number of squid species can do that already. Siren heads also plausibly maintain a lair, because they did evolve on a continent filled with massive, very dangerous predators. It's probably advantageous for them to feel safe and secure while feeding. This might also be the reason why sometimes, when it comes to siren heads' victims, you just don't find a body. Being a cephalopod and a little less environmentally durable than mammals could explain why they tend to not be seen in snowy areas or deserts. And a sensitivity to infrasound may explain why they avoid coastal areas. Sirenhead is said to avoid churches, but the only reason I can think of is because old churches were often built with acoustics in mind, and they might just sound funny. Human activity has changed the world so rapidly that Sirenhead just isn't adapted to the world we've made anymore. They're massively overstimulated all the time from human activity and our constantly switched on technology, like they're on the edge of a migraine or meltdown. In addition to that, all the noise we constantly generate blocks Sirenhead from finding others of its own kind. It's overstimulated, it's lonely, it's possibly dying of old age, and we just make everything worse for it. No wonder it hates us. Thank you for listening. My name is Dr. Ferox. Let me know what you think of this theory, and if there's other speculative biology topics you'd like me to tackle, please drop a comment down below. I will see you next time.